Hello and welcome to the next part of the Python for Beginners course. In this tutorial we're going to be focusing on Python variables. But before we delve into any of that, I just want to say that Python is pretty much all object orientated. So everything is basically an object, and therefore you can call methods on the objects and so forth. Now, we're not going to be focusing too much in the object orientation of Python in this tutorial, although we are going to be looking at that in future parts of this course. But just know that everything that you do is basically like creating an object, and then you can call methods upon that object. Now, where does that fit with variables? Well, with Python, variables aren't strictly typed, and therefore you don't have to declare the type of variable before you use them. However, when you have a variable that is a string, you can then do things on that string, or if that variable was a number, you could do things on that number. Same as if it was a list, you can do things to the list, you can sort the list, you can add things to the list, you can remove things from the list, and so forth, like you would call a method on an object. So that's basically the first point that I would like to make. It is not strictly typed. You do not have to say that this variable is going to be a string. It will work that out for you. So we're going to dive straight back into the terminal now, and we're going to start creating our own variables. Now we're going to be doing this directly into the Python interpreter. So we are in the console here. So we've started off with Python 3, which means that we are in the command line. We can see that we have started this with the 3 arrows like so. Now, you've seen me create variables before in the previous tutorials where we have foobar and we set that to a boolean, which is either true or false. Of course, there's other types of variables that we can use. We can create lists, we can create strings, and we can create all sorts of other things, including different types of numbers as well. We're going to be looking at a few of those today. Because Python isn't strictly typed, we can literally create a variable by defining the variable name and then equating that or assigning that to the value. And of course, that value can have a different type. It could be a number, it could be a float, it could be a string, and so on and so forth. First of all, let's create a simple string. So first of all, just do a variable name, and we're just going to set that as test. Now we need to do a space and then an equal symbol and then another space, and then we equate that to the value of the variable. In this case, because it is a string, it needs to be in quotes. So we're going to have this is a string, like so. Very basic. Now we close the quotes off. Now in other languages, you might start to create a variable by using the term of var. So var and then the variable name and then its value, like JavaScript. But we don't have to do this here. It is just literally the name of the variable and then its assignment. So here we're saying that the variable name is test, and we're equaling that to the string, and because it's in quotes, it is therefore a string. This is a string. And also, we don't have to have any kind of semiquote or any kind of ending thing to denote that this is a variable right at the end. It is just like this. And of course, if we press enter here, we have now created that variable and assigned it that value. So let's go ahead and print that out. And again, we can use the print method here. So print and then putting in the variable name. And if we press enter, we have the output of that variable, which is this is a string. So let's go ahead and create a number. So let's do test and then 1, equate that to the number of 45. Press enter here and we have created that variable. Again, if I was to type print and then in the parentheses put in test and then 1, we have 45. Now we've still got the first variable test already in memory, and if I was to just do print and then test again, we can see that that is already stored. However, we can redefine that. We can reassign that to another variable value. So for instance, we can do test now is equal to 52. and then press enter. And then if I was to print that out again, so print test, this is now no longer is it going to be this is a test, no longer is it a string, it is now the value of 52. So we've changed the type of the variable from a string to a number. Now we've got two numbers, we've got test and test1. What we can do is add those numbers together. So what we could do is test2 is equal to test1 plus test, and then press enter, and then do a print of test2, and that should be the output of both of those numbers combined. So we've done an addition, we've done some mathematics on that. So first of all, we had the test, which was a string. Then we have another variable, which is test1, which is a number. And then what we did is we redefined the first variable, the test variable, as a number, and then we added that to the second variable whilst creating a third variable, which is test2. So you can see that you can build variables up like this. Now these numbers are of course integers because they are whole numbers, but of course we can also use floating points as well. These are decimal places. So for example, we could now do test2 is equal to let's do 13.54 for instance. Press enter and print that out as test2, so we've gone and redefined what that variable is, and that's now 13.54. So that is a floating point. It's not an integer because it's not a whole number. Now with strings, you define that of course using the quotes, and what I've done up here is I've got two single quotes, one on either side of the string. However, like other programming languages, you can also use double quotes, so you don't have to have single quotes. What I would recommend though is whatever you choose to use, you use that throughout your application because it will just be easier to read when you're just glancing at code. Don't have a mix of single quotes and double quotes in your variables. Also, what you can't do is you can't have a single quote at the start and a double quote at the end, or vice versa. You have to keep it nice and consistent. So if you're starting a variable with a single quote, you must end that variable value with a single quote too, and also with double quotes. So for instance, test2, let's just make that a string, but this time we're going to use double quotes. So here we're just going to do this is a test, like so. And then if we did a print of test2 like so, we've got this as a value. But let's, for argument's sake, change the end quote to a single quote. Press enter. We're going to get an error, and that is because we have a problem with the end of line where it's scanning a string literal. One of the benefits of using double quotes instead of single quotes is of course the fact that you can use single quotes within the value of the variable. For instance, we might want to have a string that includes apostrophes. Now, the program will interpret an apostrophe as a single quote unless it is within double quotes. So for instance, we could have test and then 2 is equal to double quotes, this isn't, putting in a single quote as the apostrophe, this isn't a number, like so. Press enter, and that is a correct assignment of that variable value. Even though we've added a single quote here, that is an apostrophe because it is in double quotes. Now, if we were to do this the other way around, we would then break out of the variable assignment, and then we would have an issue. You'd have to escape that. We might look at that later on in other tutorials. But if I was just to print this out again, just to show you, so print of test2, we now have this isn't a number, and the output of that hasn't been affected, even though we have a single quote as the apostrophe in the word isn't. Now, one thing I really do like with Python is the fact that it allows you to have multiple assignments all on one line. Some people don't like that because maybe it's a bit difficult to read. However, if you don't have a lot of assignments and you're just assigning them to very small variables or even objects that we're going to get onto later on, then it's actually quite nice to do. So to do this, what you would do is you would have A, comma, B, comma, C. Okay, so we have three variable names. So we can now equate those variables to their designated values. So we have an equals sign here, and then after the equals sign we have the same amount of values to the variables that we have defined. So for example, here we have 3, and therefore we need to have 3 values. So in this case we could do 1 and then foo bar and then 2, like so. So what we're doing is we're assigning these 3 variable names to these 3 variable values. So A is going to be set to 1, B is going to be set to foo bar, and C is going to be set to 2. Yes, so if I press enter here, we've now created on the fly 3 variables and we've assigned them their particular values. Now notice that A and C are both integers. They are set to 1 and 2 respectively. B, on the other hand, is a string. What do you think is going to happen if I try and add all of them together? What do you think happens when you try and add an integer to a string and then to another integer? So let's try this out. Let's do test 3 is equal to A plus B plus C and press enter here. Now we have an error. It's because we have an unsupported operand. What does that mean? Well, when we're doing the pluses and the minuses, they are the operators. We are operating upon the variables. So we are adding, we are subtracting, we are multiplying, we are comparing, we're doing greater than, less than, that kind of thing. We can't do that with an integer and a string. You cannot add an integer to a string or a string to an integer and so forth. So here we're saying that we can't add an int to a string. Str, str means string, int means int. So even though Python isn't strictly typed, Python certainly knows what type of variables you have defined, and therefore it knows what variables can be operated on when in conjunction with other variables. And I must say this is fantastic because in other languages this isn't handled so well, and in fact if you go and try and add 2 data types together, then you get a completely third different data type in some languages, JavaScript. But you know, this is Python and it's a breath of fresh air. At the start of this tutorial, I mentioned that Python is very object-orientated. Even though we've created variables such as strings and integers and floating points today, we're actually creating objects, and therefore we can call methods upon those objects. So the strings that we created, we can call methods upon those. The integers that we created, they also have methods that we have available to us as well. What do I mean by this? Well, let's go and create a new variable, which is a string. So let's do test 4 is equal to, this is a string again, right? Press enter to set that. Now, at the moment, as you can see, this string isn't capitalized. It's all lowercase. So this starts with a lowercase t. How would we go about capitalizing that? Well, in some other languages what you would do is you would perhaps run it through a function or some sort of method against something else. Well, in fact, with Python, this variable test4 is an object of the type string, and therefore we can call all sorts of methods that are in the string object. So let's go ahead and call a method that will capitalize the string of test4. So what we do is type test4 like this, and now what we need to do is call upon a method of the string object, and we do this by putting in a dot or a period symbol like so, and that means that we are about to call a method on that object. And remember, this object is a string, so any method, any string method is now available to us. But again, how do we find this? Well, if you just press tab a couple of times, you can see a complete output of all of the methods available to us. So we have, for instance, capitalize, which is the one we're going to use in a minute. We have count, so we can actually count the amount of characters in the string. And we also have lower and we also have upper. These might sound very familiar if you've come from PHP. And what you can do is call upon those methods to alter the variable that is the object. So for example here, let's do capitalize. So let's just copy that like so and put that in. It's a method, so you have to call it like so with the parentheses, press enter, and we have the output, but notice that this is a string again, starts with a capital T. Whereas up here we set it to a lowercase t. So any kind of method that we've got here, notice we have replace and we have splits and strips and all sorts of bits and pieces, all very interesting things that we can do to manipulate strings are available to us. Now, let's say, for example, there is another method that we want beginning with C. So what we do is let's just go up here, remove that. Let's just put in C and then press tab a few times. This is an extremely useful way of discovering what is available to you in Python. Now we have literally just scraped the surface of Python, and throughout this course we're going to be focusing even more on different types of variables and how we can manipulate those variables through the object methods later on in this course. But if you found this useful, if you found this helpful, then do let me know. If you've got any questions, comments or queries, put them down in the comments section below. Also, if you've got suggestions for future parts of this course or other courses that I do. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe, because I have a tutorial like this every Tuesday and also a discussion on software development every week. Thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.